Hello, and welcome to today's session, Migration of Approved Studies from webIRB to BruinIRB. Today's session will focus on the first step in our transition to the BruinIRB application, data migration. Data migration allows us to utilize IT resources to auto-populate your submission in BruinIRB. As part of today's session, we'll discuss what we mean by data migration, how migration will impact currently approved studies, review the timeline for the migration of studies, understand what information will be migrated, how you'll know your study's been migrated, and how you'll access historical information on your migrated study. We'll also discuss a little bit, what do you do once your study has been migrated? How do you access historical information, the required amendment that will be necessary in BruinIRB, and where do you complete your future submissions? So just so we are all starting from the same page, data migration refers to the process of selecting, extracting, and mapping data from one system to permanently transfer it to another. In order to fully understand how migration impacts currently approved studies in webIRB, it's important to review a few important terms that we will use when discussing our transition to BruinIRB. Legacy studies refer to currently approved studies in webIRB with no pending amendments, continuations, or post-approval reports. In contrast, in-flight studies refers to currently approved studies in webIRB with a pending amendment, continuation, or post-approval report in webIRB. This would also include any new study in webIRB that is at any point in the process. Migrated studies refers to those studies that were approved originally in webIRB, but that have been transferred to BruinIRB. Once a study is migrated, all future submissions will be completed in BruinIRB. WebIRB will only serve as a reference for documentation of the prior review history. When will your study be migrated to BruinIRB? Legacy studies or approved studies with no open follow-on submissions are expected to be migrated between September 9th and September 20th, 2024. We cannot tell you the exact date that your study will be migrated. Batches of studies will be migrated each week starting the week of September 9th. Approximately 1,900 approved studies requiring annual continuing review will be migrated through September 30th. It's important that you understand that of your approved studies may be migrated at different times. The number of studies to be migrated each week will be set to maximize the number of studies that can complete migration during a designated session. Weekly migration of approved studies from webIRB will continue until all approved studies have been successfully migrated to BruinIRB. During the migration of Reliance study to BruinIRB in 2022, approximately 650 studies were migrated in one weekend. However, full board studies are much more involved, have larger and multiple attachments, so we anticipate that it will take more time to migrate a single full board study than it did a Reliance study. All approved studies with no continuing review requirement will be migrated during the month of October, if not starting beforehand. And then for studies in flight, so either because there's an amendment, continuation, post-approval report, or a brand new study that is in the midst of IRB review, they will be set into a queue to be migrated on a weekly basis until all approved studies have been successfully migrated to BruinIRB. So you may have noted that the prior slides did not discuss exempt studies. So if a study was deemed exempt, the plan is not to migrate these studies. OHRP leadership determined that it's not necessary to migrate these studies as an exempt determination is granted for the life of the study. There is no annual review requirement, and in most cases, it's very unlikely to have to amend or alter your exempt determination. We understand that there's some long-term observational research that has been exempted for multiple years and that is continuing, and may be a need to update personnel or to update study instruments or makes minor changes to the protocol that don't impact the previously given exempt determination. For this reason, studies that have been certified exempt those researchers will be able to request migration on a specific study. In August of 2024, investigators, PI proxies, and protocol contacts of exempt studies will receive a notification in webIRB advising them of what action must be taken if they have a need to amend a previously granted exempt determination. Now, you may be wondering, well, with the migration and you know that you have a large upcoming amendment from your sponsor or from your study team, are you able to request that your study not be migrated if you have a pending amendment? An approved study cannot have an open follow-on submission. That includes amendments, continuing reviews, or PARs, or be anywhere in the review process in order to be migrated. So migration of your study to BruinIRB cannot occur until the submission under review is completed. Therefore, there's no reason for you to request that a study not be migrated. If you open an amendment and it's anywhere in the IRB review process, migration will be held until the review of that amendment is completed in webIRB. Once the pending submission is completed, the approved study will be eligible for migration and will be entered into the queue for migration. And your study team will receive a notification once that study has been completely migrated. So OHRP and ORIS have worked closely to minimize the impact of the transition to BruinIRB for researchers and their support staff. We have created migration script that allows study-related information to be pre-populated in BruinIRB. Migration scripts will also transfer the latest IRB-reviewed study documents to BruinIRB for use in your future submissions. We anticipate the process of migration should be seamless to the researcher and study team. Again, we remind you that approved studies for a single investigator may be migrated at different time points. As part of our migration script, like responses to application questions will be taken from webIRB and pre-populated in BruinIRB. The last review study documents, protocol, consent forms, recruitment documents, IBs will all be brought into BruinIRB. So what this means is that you will not have to completely re-enter your submission in BruinIRB. We have worked carefully to map responses to application questions between webIRB and BruinIRB to minimize the amount of information you will have to complete when you begin working in BruinIRB. So this is kind of an example of our migration script where we identify the webIRB question and we map it to a question in BruinIRB, and we direct the application to pre-populate that submission. Most questions will be pre-populated for each submission at the time of migration. However, there are new and required questions in BruinIRB that will need to be addressed as part of a future amendment. For studies utilizing health system resources, there will be approximately 10 yes or no questions to address. You don't have to take immediate action on this amendment. However, the first time you create an amendment in BruinIRB, you will be directed to complete the new and required questions as part of that amendment. You will not have to redesignate your study contact or your PI proxies. Information on approved study team members, including training information and roles assigned, will auto-populate in BruinIRB. You will not have to reassign PI proxies after migration. How about your approved document? So as part of migration, we will take a snapshot of the last approved submission application in BruinIRB, and we will post that to a tab in the BruinIRB workspace called Snapshots. The snapshot will also include the PDFs of the last set of approved documents, your consent or recruitment documents. And so as you can see from this table, we took documents that were uploaded in the webIRB application and directed them to particular pages in the BruinIRB submission. So this is where you'll find your study protocol, recruitment documents, informed consent, your funding information, any screeners, additional information, and conflict of interest information. What's important for you to note is that BruinIRB is a much abbreviated application. So whereas you are uploading documents in up to 6 or 7 different locations in webIRB, in BruinIRB, most documents are uploaded under the page local study documents. There's a section for consent, recruitment, and then a catch-all section called other study documents. You will continue to access webIRB for older versions of your approval notices and approved study documents with older submissions. While last reviewed study documents will be brought into BruinIRB, it's important to note that you will have to continue to access the history of prior approvals and the related stamped documents in webIRB. Because webIRB will eventually be taken offline, we encourage you to take steps now to ensure that your regulatory binder is up to date with approvals and related study documents. You will, the study PI, study contact, and proxy will receive an email at the time your study is migrated. You will receive this in your email box, and it will also post to the history of your study in webIRB as well as BruinIRB. Your webIRB workspace will change a bit. Your current state will go from approved to migrated, and then additionally, you'll see a new yellow box that gives you a link to your BruinIRB submission. The webIRB workspace will retain the history of the submission and related documents, including your prior approval notices and stamped versions of your study documents. Until the First Amendment is approved in BruinIRB, you're going to want to continue to access your documents in webIRB. In BruinIRB, you will have a similar link to get you back into webIRB for any historical reference. Also, the history will confirm that your study has been migrated from webIRB. So do you have to take any steps once your study is migrated to BruinIRB? Yes. An amendment to complete new and required questions in BruinIRB is required. You don't have to do this immediately, but upon your first amendment, you will be asked to complete new and required questions in BruinIRB. This amendment has to be completed before webIRB is taken offline, which isn't anticipated to happen any sooner than fall of 2025. The amendment will be required to give you submission access to administrative functions like edit study personnel or update study details. We've had some questions about the impact of the feed from webIRB to Encore and how that will be impacted with the transition to BruinIRB. Migration will not impact the information currently stored in Encore. While your study ID number will change slightly from a 8-digit to a 6-digit number, only the leading zeros will be removed. The automatic feed will capture this minor change and will update your record accordingly. Upon approval, any subsequent amendments and continuing review, your feed will continue as before, and we don't anticipate any impact. We've had quite a bit of experience with the feed of information to Encore with Reliance studies, with no issues encountered. So what's going to happen to webIRB, and do you need to start worrying now? WebIRB will be maintained in a view-only format for a limited period of time for migrated studies. We anticipate that we will have webIRB online at least through fall of 2025 to ensure that everything is migrated, all pending studies are migrated. We have committed to campus, however, to provide at least a 6 months notice before webIRB is taken offline. So you don't have to act immediately, but we do, again, encourage all investigators to take time this summer to review your regulatory binders and ensure all necessary regulatory documentation is up to date, anticipating that webIRB will eventually be taken offline. So how do you set yourself up for success? Continue to attend and register for our Learn at Lunch sessions or view videos of our completed sessions on the OHRPP YouTube channel. Anticipate that the September 24 transition to BruinIRB for new studies, and be sure to attend trainings to facilitate the submission of your planned studies in our new system. Once your study is migrated, complete the required First Amendment to populate new and required questions in BruinIRB. And then most importantly, be sure your study regulatory binder is up to date. You want to, at a minimum, confirm all approval memos, study snapshots, and approved consents for each submission are stored outside of webIRB. Again, you will have a snapshot of the last approved submission in webIRB for historical reference, as well as access to the last set of approved documents in webIRB. If you need any help on how to maintain your regulatory binder, we include a link here to ResearchGo at ucla.edu with information on regulatory binders. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, you're happy to direct them to me at this email. You can also request department-specific training for your department by contacting our Education and Quality Improvement team. And of course, we have the BruinIRB email for any questions or technical assistance related to BruinIRB. Thank you.